Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material, articles, research papers, field notes, and, well, we cut right to the insights, making you the most informed person in the room, and fast.
And today we are really digging into a fascinating piece of machinery, the Grumman OV-1 Mohawk.
A plane that is, it's part rugged observation tool, part revolutionary tech platform, and maybe most importantly, part deep-seated political irritant inside the Pentagon.
Oh, absolutely. It's a truly complex machine to study. The Mohawk was a twin-turboprop aircraft designed back in the 1950s, and its success almost immediately forced this massive inter-service fight.
A fight that actually changed the rules of engagement for U.S. Army aviation for decades.
For decades. So our mission today is to uncover why this resilient plane, it was often called the secret eye of the Army, not only survived all that conflict and the political battles, but also pulled off a combat feat that the Army for years tried desperately to erase from history.
Okay, let's unpack that. The Grumman OV-1 Mohawk, manufactured between 1959 and 1970, and they built about 380 of them in the end.
Right. And officially, its category was an American armed military observation and attack aircraft.
And when you first look at the Mohawk, the configuration, it just jumps right out at you. You've got the twin-turboprop engines, that very distinctive high wing, and then the cockpit. It's a robust, side-by-side seating arrangement for the two crew members.
The pilot and the observer, or the sensor operator, sitting shoulder to shoulder.
Exactly.
And that whole profile, it was dictated by a single mandate. Rugged efficiency. This wasn't designed for, say, high-altitude strategic reconnaissance like a U-2.
Not at all.
It was designed specifically for battlefield surveillance and, at least initially, for light strike capabilities. And crucially, that airframe, it needed the inherent strength in that wing design to operate from short, unimproved runways.
So we're talking dirt strips, hastily prepared clearings, that kind of thing.
That's it. That battlefield agility, the ability to launch intelligence operations right alongside the troops it was supporting, that was the core requirement.
And the context for this tells us exactly why the Army needed such a huge jumping capability. They weren't just looking for something new. They were reacting directly to some very stark lessons from the Korean War.
Absolutely. They were desperate to replace their main observation platform at the time, which was the venerable Cessna L-19 Bird Dog.
The Bird Dog was essential in Korea, but it was just so vulnerable.
Oh, incredibly. It was slow, often fabric-skinned, completely unarmored. It was vulnerable to ground fire, even small arms fire.
So in a world that's moving toward high-speed, jet-powered warfare, that's just not going to cut it.
Not at all. The Army needed something that could survive, first of all, but also collect intelligence and, most importantly, deliver that intelligence rapidly. The Army's 1956 type specification, TS-145, it was crystal clear on this.
What did it ask for?
A two-seat, twin-turboprop, all-weather observation platform. And it had to be capable of handling small, rough fields. It had to be tough, fast, and protected.
That is a significant upgrade.
Yeah.
You're going from what is basically a light civil aircraft to a military twin-turboprop with armor and some serious power.
It's a whole different league. But this search for the ultimate battlefield observation tool, it almost immediately hit, let's call it bureaucratic turbulence.
And that turbulence started because this wasn't just an Army project, was it?
No, not initially. It began as a joint program. It involved the Army and the Marine Corps, and the whole thing was managed through the Navy Bureau of Aeronautics, or BOAR.
And anytime you combine the requirements of two different fighting forces and then filter them through a third branch's procurement office.
You are absolutely setting the stage for massive compromise and conflict.
Which is fascinating because it led to this impossibly wide initial mission scope. They were trying to satisfy everyone.
Everyone. It wasn't just observation. The original list for the Mohawk included, okay, get this, observation, forward artillery spotting, air control for troop movements, naval target spotting.
That's the Navy's requirement, of course.
Right. Then liaison between units, radiological monitoring, and even emergency resupply drops. They wanted one aircraft that could do basically everything short of heavy bombing.
And inside that enormous mission scope, we find what has to be the most bizarre, the most exotic requirement, one that just screams Marine Corps Expeditionary Operations.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
The water skis.
The water skis, yes. This often gets glossed over as like a funny footnote, but it tells you everything about the design pressures.
So what was the thinking there?
The Marines were anticipating operations where you just wouldn't have airfields, specifically island landings, so they required the capability for the Mohawk to be fitted with skis.
To land at sea.
To land at sea or near a beach, and then taxi directly onto the island at speeds up to 20 knots, about 37 kilometers per hour.
Wait, hold on. We are talking about a sophisticated twin-turboprop intelligence platform, not a little float plane.
Okay.
And it was designed to land on the ocean and then drive itself up onto a potentially hostile beach.
That's what they wanted. That level of ruggedness, that versatility is almost unbelievable. And it's what cemented Grumman's winning G-134 design in 1957.
But that kind of ambition, trying to build this do-everything hybrid, that's where the friction starts, especially around armament.
Which brings us to the first major political flashpoint. The Marines, by their doctrine, they're authorized to operate fixed-wing aircraft in a close air support, or CAS, role.
So, of course, when the Mohawk mock-up was presented, it had underwing pylons.
Exactly. And those pylons were there for rockets, for bombs, for all sorts of specialized stores. But the moment the Army had a platform that was capable of carrying weapons, even if that capability was initially driven by the Marines' needs, well, the alarm bells went off.
In one place that mattered most, the United States Air Force.
The one place that mattered most.
So this is where we really need to get into that political friction. The Air Force sees the Army fielding an armed fixed-wing aircraft, and they immediately try to shut it down. Why? Why were they so against the Army operating anything that could be seen as a combat aircraft?
Well, it goes all the way back to the foundational agreements that govern military roles after World War II, primarily the Key West Agreement of 1948.
Which basically split up the sky.
It did. It split the operational sphere.
Okay.
The Army handled land warfare, and they owned helicopters. The Air Force controlled nearly all strategic and tactical fixed-wing combat aviation. So the Mohawk, with its armor, its speed, and those underwing pylons, it looked suspiciously like a ground attack plane to the Air Force.
And a threat to their fixed-wing monopoly.
Well, direct threat. So the Air Force fought tooth and nail to get the armament stripped off the design. Meanwhile, you have the Marines, whose requirements started this whole thing. They start getting cold feet.
Why?
They decided they didn't really want to invest in such a sensor-heavy platform. They needed something more focused purely on combat utility. So the whole joint program just starts to collapse under its own weight.
And the Marines officially drop out in September of '57.
They do. And you just can't make up the reason why. The Navy decided to divert the budget that was allocated for the Mohawk, the plane with the water skis, to fund the construction of a fleet oil tanker instead.
A Tanker 1. A Tanker 1 over a high-tech surveillance platform. That is a perfect example of how defense procurement works sometimes.
Logistics over tactics. But the Army, they saw the essential need for this advanced observation capability. So they persisted, even after the Marines and the Navy were gone.
And they kept the armed capability.
They did. They even developed unique accessories like these specialized droppable cargo pods that could deliver emergency resupply to troops using those hardpoints. It was a clear sign they intended to use those stations one way or another.
But this persistence came at a cost, right? Financially.
A huge cost. All those design compromises that were mandated by the joint program, like having complex ejection seats, features to satisfy Navy carrier deck requirements, they made the Mohawk a really expensive aircraft.
Which created constant resistance in Army budgets down the line.
Exactly. It was kind of a victim of its own robust multi-service design.
And this political friction, it finally just explodes into formal policy. We've talked about the turf war. Now we need to talk about the policy that tried to stop it. The Johnson-McConnell Agreement.
Right. This is the essential historical context you have to understand the next 30 years of Army aviation. The controversy over the Army wanting to operate armed fixed-wing planes like the Mohawk, it reached its peak around 1965.
And this led directly to the 1966 Johnson-McConnell Agreement, named after the Secretary of Defense and the Air Force Chief of Staff.
That's right.
And what was the core commandment of that directive?
It was a formal directive that basically codified the Air Force's victory. It prohibited the Army from operating any armed fixed-wing aircraft.
So the idea was the Air Force handles all close air support and attack roles from the sky.
And the Army focuses on ground operations and rotary wing, helicopter aviation.
That is a huge distinction because the Army had armed helicopters, but they were now strictly prohibited from fielding armed fixed-wing platforms.
Right. So the Mohawk was designed with a light strike role in mind, but its actual deployment was instantly crippled by a political pen stroke.
The armament was now officially legally off limits.
Correct. And yet, the aircraft was already flying, and its capabilities were just too important to discard. The prototype flew on April 14, 1959. Production started fast. By mid-1961, the first Mohawks were already overseas.
Delivered to the 7th Army in Germany at Sandhofen Airfield. They needed these eyes in the sky immediately.
They did, and the initial impression was strong enough that it even got international interest. Germany and France were looking very closely at the design. Grumman even signed a licensing agreement with Brega Aviation in France.
So the world recognized its quality.
For sure. This U.S. Army design, meant for battlefield agility, was seen as a template for quick, robust, close-range recon all over Europe.
It's amazing that this plane, which was constantly under threat from inside the Pentagon, was already out there redefining reconnaissance.
It was. And that brings us to the tool that made it so indispensable, the technology that truly cemented the Mohawk's legacy.
If the airframe was built for ruggedness, its brain was the Colt.
The side-looking airborne radar, or SLAR, this was the single greatest technological leap the Mohawk represented. It moved battlefield surveillance from, just visual observation to all-weather, near real-time mapping.
Okay, so for you listening, you might be familiar with traditional radar, but not SLAR. How does that side-looking concept actually differ from conventional radar?
So traditional radar, like weather radar, it looks straight ahead and gives you range and bearing. SLAR is different. It's mounted under the wing in this long pod, and it beams microwave energy sideways, perpendicular to the aircraft's flight path.
Like a photocopier scanner moving across a page.
That's a great analogy. As the aircraft flies, the radar creates this long swath of scanned terrain off to the side. And crucially, it uses the Doppler effect, that shift in frequency caused by motion, to process the return signal with incredible precision.
So it's building a detailed image based on the time it takes for those radar echoes to return. Why was this so revolutionary for the environments the Army was fighting in? Like, say, dense jungles.
That's the key. Because radar energy operates in the microwave spectrum, it has this unique ability to penetrate foliage and even light cloud cover.
Which means a commander could get a clear map of terrain, river crossings, roads, trails, all hidden under the thick canopy of Southeast Asia.
A feat that was just impossible with standard photographic reconnaissance at the time.
And the information retrieval was also incredibly fast, especially for the analog systems of the 1960s.
Oh, absolutely. The system recorded the returning radar signals onto photographic film right inside the SLR pod. So the observer sitting right next to the pilot would receive the finished film image just minutes after the scanning was complete.
It's like having a portable real-time war planner on board.
Exactly, ready to deliver fresh intelligence just moments after collection.
And this rapid output was then refined even further by a crucial military function. The image was deliberately split.
Yes. The SLR image was presented in two distinct parts. The first part showed the fixed terrain features, the mountains, the infrastructure, the rivers. That gave you the baseline map. But the second part, and this was invaluable for tactical commanders, it was filtered specifically to spot moving targets.
So if an enemy truck convoy or a unit of troops was on the move,
The system would immediately highlight that movement against the static geographical background. This ability to instantly differentiate between static geography and dynamic enemy movement, it made the SLR-equipped Mohawk an unparalleled tactical intelligence platform.
it's no wonder they were deployed immediately to high-tension areas.
For sure. Operational missions patrolling the Korean Demilitarized Zone began as early as 1963. Detecting small movements across that line was, the difference between peace and conflict.
And that versatility meant the Mohawk design had to adapt constantly, which gave rise to what you call the alphabet soup of observation across its different variants.
A whole alphabet soup.
Let's break down the primary ones, and not just the letter, but the tactical need each one fulfilled.
Okay, we start with the baseline, the OV-1A. This was the original daylight observation and basic photo recon platform. It was the Visual Scout, and it had the shorter wingspan, optimized for agility.
Then came the big upgrade, the OV-1B.
That was the definitive side-looking radar variant. And to carry that heavy, long SLAR pod, it needed a longer wingspan. It jumped from 42 feet to 48 feet.
Which also helped its high-altitude performance, I'd imagine.
It did. Then the next iteration, the OV-1C, addressed a different tactical need. It moved from daylight and radar into thermal detection.
Infrared.
Precisely. The C model incorporated infrared or IR reconnaissance gear. This was crucial for night operations detecting campfires, engine heat signatures, recent ground disturbance, things like that.
And it went back to the shorter wingspan.
It did, yeah, because the IR gear was much lighter than the big SLAR pod. But here's where it gets interesting, because the Army, still operating under that strict political constraint of the Johnson-McConnell Agreement, found a way to maintain an armed capability.
You're talking about the JOV-1A conversions. This feels like the Army being defiant, right?
It absolutely does. The JOV-1A wasn't a new production model, it was a field conversion. They took 59 existing OV-1A and OV-1C models, and they specifically refitted them with the underwing pylons and the wiring to carry armament.
And these were often for deployment in active combat zones, like Vietnam?
Right where the need for self-defense or rapid ground suppression was acute. So on paper, they were just observation aircraft, but in the field, they were armed birds ready to fight back. It really shows how bureaucracy bends when it's confronted with combat necessity.
The adaptation didn't stop there either. Beyond photo, radar, and thermal, the Mohawk became a key platform for electronic intelligence. ELINT.
Yeah, you see the development of this whole electronic reconnaissance family. The RV-1C, the RV-1D, famously nicknamed Quick Look 2, and the EV-1E, or Quick Look 3.
These were basically flying listening posts.
That's what they were. Intercepting enemy radio comms, tracking radar signals, and building this comprehensive picture of the opponent's electronic order of battle.
That is an extraordinary range of roles for one single airframe. And all of this dedication to flexibility, it must have culminated in the final, ultimate version of the design.
It did in the OV-1D. The D model was the pinnacle. It was the synthesis of the Mohawk's mission. It had upgraded, more powerful, Lycoming T-53L701 engines and state-of-the-art avionics for the time.
But the real genius was something called the mission palette concept.
This was revolutionary for logistics. Think of the Mohawk like a high-end professional camera. Before the D model, if you wanted to switch from SLAR, your wide-angle mapping lens, to IR, your night photography lens, you basically needed a different camera body.
And a whole new maintenance routine.
Exactly. The mission palette concept changed that. The primary mission equipment, the complex IR gear, or the bulky SLAR pod, it was mounted on a standardized, quickly detachable pallet in the fuselage bay.
So instead of having highly specialized aircraft that could only do one job, the Army could use one airframe and just swap the intelligence package based on the day's mission.
That's it. Crews could change the aircraft from an infrared night recon configuration to a SLAR mapping mission in about an hour, with standard field maintenance equipment.
Wow. An hour. That is a game changer.
It was. This rapid retasking capability made the OV-1D incredibly valuable. It vastly reduced the number of specialized aircraft the Army needed to keep operational. 37 new OV-1Ds were built, and 82 earlier airframes were converted. It proved its worth.
So we have this exceptionally adaptable, sensor-heavy aircraft that the Army desperately needs for intelligence superiority.
Yet its very existence is constantly under threat from the Air Force.
That tension just has to boil over once this plane hits true combat operations.
And it did. The Mohawk proved its true worth in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Its success in Vietnam were so undeniable that despite the strict limitations of the Johnson-McConnell Agreement, the Army placed additional orders in 1966.
So they had a political directive telling them to back off, but the reality of combat was screaming for more Mohawks.
That's it, exactly. The service began early. In September 1962, the 23rd Special Warfare Aviation Detachment deployed to South Vietnam for initial surveillance and operational testing.
And those missions were critical for generating intelligence that ground units just couldn't get otherwise.
Not from slower helicopters or high-flying strategic assets. The key was persistence and the ability to operate quickly from those forward bases.
And by 1968, usage had ramped up significantly. You have 5 full surveillance companies operating the Mohawk across Southeast Asia. But that came at a very steep price.
A very steep price.
Yeah.
65 Mohawks were lost during the Vietnam War.
65?
Yeah. And that loss rate, it reflects the inherent danger of their mission profile. They had to fly relatively low, under 10,000 feet, and often slowly enough for the sensors to get good data.
Which made them prime targets for heavy ground fire.
Prime targets. Many were shot down. It really highlights the risk those crews took to get that crucial intelligence.
That number, 65 losses, is sobering. It really illustrates the vulnerability the Air Force warned about. But despite that, one single incident completely defied all logic. And it proved the Army's insistence on keeping an armed capability, even unofficially, was justified.
This is the centerpiece of the Mohawk's legend. The story of the Army's only recorded MiG kills since World War II. It's an anecdote that perfectly encapsulates the entire struggle the aircraft faced.
Walk us through this. A turboprop observation plane engaging a dedicated fighter jet.
The incident happened in early 1968. U.S. Army Captain Ken Lee was flying an OV-1 over South Vietnam. His mission was surveillance, but he found himself intercepted by a North Vietnamese MiG-17 Fresco fighter jet.
A MiG-17, an agile, jet-powered dogfighter, way faster than the Mohawk.
Significantly faster.
That must have been terrifying. I mean, what chance did he possibly have? What was his Mohawk even carrying, weapon-wise, given all the political constraints?
Well, Lee's Mohawk was one of those JOV-1A conversions, so it was armed. He was carrying two types of ordnance. First, two XM14.50 caliber gun pods.
Okay, heavy machine guns.
Right, 12.7 millimeter. And second, two M159 unguided rocket pods. And it was a combination of these that let him win. Accounts suggest Lee used the Mohawk's superior low-speed handling and its ruggedness to outmaneuver the faster MiG-17.
So he used the jet speed against it.
He did, capitalizing on the jet's tendency to overshoot in close combat. When the MiG made a pass, Lee opened fire with everything he had, and the combination of the heavy machine gun rounds and the unguided rockets. It destroyed the MiG.
An astonishing victory for a plane never, ever meant for air-to-air combat. But the fallout from this, it didn't bring medals, it brought silence. Why did the Army want to keep this a secret for so long?
This is where that political context becomes absolutely paramount. The Army was terrified, and I mean genuinely terrified, that formally recognizing an Army aviator achieving an air-to-air kill with a fixed-wing aircraft would be seen by the Air Force as indisputable proof.
That the Army was violating the Key West Agreement and the Johnson-McConnell Agreement.
Exactly. The fear was that the Air Force would use the MiG kill as leverage to demand the transfer of the entire Mohawk fleet, all the sensor packages, all the advanced radar systems out of Army inventory and into USAF control.
So they saw this single successful combat engagement as potentially gutting their entire aerial recon capability.
Which, by the late 60s, was heavily reliant on the Mohawk's specialized sensors. The intelligence gained by the Mohawk was worth more to the Army than the pride of claiming a MiG kill. So they buried the paperwork. They kept quiet.
That is just a profound cost of bureaucratic warfare. An incredible combat achievement silenced for nearly 40 years just to protect institutional turf.
It really speaks volumes about the constant threat the Mohawk operated under. Lee's kill was finally formally recognized by the Army in 2007, long after the aircraft was retired and the operational stakes had passed.
But it proves the Mohawk was an effective armed platform, even if the Army was legally prohibited from saying so.
It does. And moving beyond Vietnam, the Mohawk's operational footprint was vast, and its relevance endured well past the end of the Cold War.
Where else was it providing that essential surveillance?
Its role in Cold War Europe, where the first ones deployed in '61, that was crucial for border surveillance, detecting potential Soviet movements. And likewise, it continued its mission patrolling the Korean DMZ, using that SLAR capability for continuous all-weather monitoring.
And it saw domestic service as well, right? It transitioned to the Army National Guard.
It did, starting in 1972. The ARNG gave the fleet a long life, operating the B, C, and D models with units in Georgia and Oregon. This kept the airframes active and the expertise alive.
And, amazingly, demonstrating its longevity, it was deployed for combat recon late in its life during Operation Desert Storm in 1991.
That's right.
By 1991, surveillance tech had advanced dramatically. You had satellites, sophisticated jets everywhere. What specific niche was the Mohawk still filling in Desert Storm?
Well, despite that high-tech environment, the Mohawk's unique ability to operate from short forward airfields and provide rapid ground-level SLAR and ELINT coverage was still vital.
So it filled the gap between strategic satellite imagery, which might be too slow or too broad,
and the tactical intelligence needed by units on the move. Its low-flying ELINT capabilities were particularly useful for gathering signals intelligence in a high-tempo conflict like that one.
But even the most durable aircraft eventually reached the end of their service lives. What prompted the final retirement of the Mohawk in the mid-1990s?
It was a gradual retirement, really driven by two main factors: the increasing digitalization and networking of intelligence, and the full establishment of a new inter-service surveillance doctrine.
When did they finally stand down?
It was retired from Europe in 1992, from South Korea in September 1996, and the final U.S. retirement was in 1996.
And what replaced its immediate role?
Initially, its direct replacement was the EO-5C. This was a militarized version of the de Havilland Canada-7, a four-engine turboprop airliner.
So a larger, safer, higher-flying platform.
Essentially, yeah,
Yeah.
equipped with the next generation of SLAR. But the ultimate replacement, the evolution of that massive battlefield radar surveillance role the Mohawk pioneered, was the U.S. Air Force's Northrop Grumman E-8 Joint STARS.
Right. Joint STARS, the Joint Surveillance Target Attack Radar System.
Huh.
That took the Mohawk's moving target indicator concept and put it on a strategic jet platform, networking the entire battlefield.
Exactly. It moved the mission from tactical coverage a few miles off the ground to this massive high-altitude strategic overview, and that shift required fewer, albeit much larger and more expensive, aircraft.
The digital revolution made the Mohawk's film-based processing obsolete, even if the airframe itself was still perfectly capable.
That's a perfect way to put it. But the aircraft itself found new homes internationally.
It did. The Argentine Army Aviation received 23 OV-1s in the 1990s. They flew them until 2015.
And it was also famously operated by the Israeli Air Force. They nicknamed it the Atalef,
Which is Hebrew for bat.
a fitting name for a surveillance aircraft that often flew at night.
Before we discuss its final legacy, let's just revisit the nuts and bolts, the specs of the OV-1D, because that sheer toughness, the performance metrics, they're key to understanding why it was so successful in those austere environments.
Looking at the physical machine really confirms the Army's original requirements for ruggedness. The OV-1D was powered by two Lycoming T-53L701 turboprops, each delivering about 1,400 shaft horsepower.
Which gave it a top speed of 305 mph and a service ceiling of 25,000 feet. But those numbers don't tell the whole story. The crucial specs are all about its stay-sole capability. Short, takeoff, and landing.
That's right. Explain those Sestalo metrics in context. What does that mean for a commander on the battlefield?
Well, the ability to operate from unimproved fields was non-negotiable. And if you look at the numbers, to take off and clear a 50-foot obstacle, it needed only 1,175 feet of runway.
That's not much at all.
And to land from a 50-foot obstacle, it needed just 1,060 feet. In real-world terms, those figures mean the Mohawk could operate from any relatively flat stretch of road, a field, or a hastily prepared dirt strip right behind the front lines.
Which allowed for rapid mission turnaround and ensured the intelligence from the SLR was delivered directly to the ground commanders who needed it immediately. That's what made it a true battlefield asset.
It's so interesting that even years after it was retired, the idea of the Mohawk as a useful combat tool just didn't die. In 2011, there was a serious venture to bring a modernized, armed version of the OV-1D back into service.
Specifically for a counterinsurgency or Korean role. This was a really compelling demonstration. Alliant Tech Systems partnered with a few groups to show that the Mohawk's robust airframe and short field capability, its low cost and persistence, still made it perfect for Korean operations.
And this demonstrator was fitted with modern sensors, a FLIR turret, and critically, a ventral trainable M230 chain gun.
So the cycle just repeats itself. 40 years later, the same political argument. Should the Army field a heavily armed fixed-wing surveillance platform? It just reemerged, but this time dressed up for the war on terror.
It proves the enduring utility of the fundamental concept.
It absolutely confirms that when mission requirements demand persistent, rugged, affordable surveillance close to the ground, the Mohawk design still holds up. And today, its legacy is secure. The number of surviving Mohawks is remarkable.
They're in museums and on bases all over the country.
And several are still airworthy, operated by private companies like Mohawk Technologies. It's a huge testament to Grumman's initial, very robust engineering.
So we've covered the ground. The Mohawk was born from a disastrous joint program, introduced revolutionary SLAR technology that could pierce the jungle canopy, constantly defied political limits to carry armament, and
against all odds, achieved the only Army MiG kill since World War II, an achievement that had to be suppressed just to save the program itself.
It was a robust hybrid that just refused to be pigeonholed. It kept finding ways to be essential, even when institutional politics tried to transfer or prohibit its mission.
The Mohawk story is a perfect encapsulation of how technological necessity, that urgent need for better battlefield vision, it forces military structures to adapt, often against their own established doctrine.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on. The Mohawk was born from the need to put sophisticated, human-operated sensors right above the battlefield. This immediately led to intense political battles over whether the Army should operate what the Air Force considered to be fixed-wing combat aircraft. Now, given that the Army today uses unmanned aerial systems drones for many of the exact same reconnaissance, surveillance, and even light strike roles the Mohawk pioneered. Does the story of the OV-1 prove that the very nature of an intelligence gathering always pushes the limits of institutional boundaries, whether the vehicle carrying the sensor package is crewed or uncrewed? Is the technology the driver, and is the political fight simply the inevitable cost of innovation?